You're listening to the Zen Cop Podcast.
Guys, welcome back. Mac Rollins, Zen Cop here. It is the Zen Cop Podcast, Season 2, Episode 11. It is just me today. I wanted to hop on here and do a quick episode, and that is going to be on the topic of relationships. And relationships in general is a very broad brush, and we're kind of going to bounce around a little bit, but specifically the relationship between the employer and the employee, which right now I feel like is a very critical speaking point. And we're just sort of navigating this post 2020 world, and not just in cop world, but I think in shift work in general, specifically shift work, which has been proven inherently over and over and over. It can be one of the most toxic working environments when it's not done correctly. And the reality is that no matter what we do, there's going to be a certain level of uncertainty, and also things that we just can't control as we try to navigate shift work as a whole, retention, and so forth. So first and foremost, though, when we talk about a relationship, the relationship concept that I would like to focus on today would be very similar to a marriage or any other relationship that does require a certain level of commitment. Platonic relationships and friendships are kind of different because there's skin in the game, but not as much as to say, two people who are committed to each other in a way that would be a lot harder than just say, hey, I don't want to hang out with you anymore. Even though there are friendships that are strong and powerful for purposes of what we're talking about today, I want to talk about a relationship that has not only deep value, but there would be loss for either side of that relationship if one person was to say, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. In the workplace, even though we tend to not really think of it as a relationship, for most jobs that involve shift work, and specifically that in the first responder community, but specific to law enforcement, it's a very toxic working environment at the ground level, because the very existence as to why we are here is based on a foundation that is created by negativity. It's just, there's no other way to really address that. And that's the elephant in the room, that we have to understand that the majority, if not all of what we do, is going to be based on the existence of something bad, something that, wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. And now it's our job to essentially figure it out. That alone is enough to cause a tremendous amount of stress for the employee and the employer. There's no day off. There's no pause button. It is a 365. And that's why I sort of started with the term shift work, because shift work implies that there are no breaks. It is a constant need that will never go away. And if the door is shut for even an hour, it would be chaos within minutes. So that is sort of the baseline. And again, I try to keep topics relevant to just about everybody, but even a relaxed version of shift work can carry a very large amount of stress. So what is a workplace relationship, and why is it like a marriage or another relationship that would involve, two people that are essentially committed and do have skin in the game on both sides? Well, a workplace relationship can be summed up in a sentence, and that for me is communication is paramount. And that is one of the most important things that we can take away from this, that if there's no communication, you're likely to have issues that will go unaddressed, and then they'll become bigger issues down the road. And we see this constantly with people who are in relationships that are struggling, or they are being challenged in certain ways. And usually the general nexus is that there's not an open line of communication between those two people. And that generally leads to a small problem becoming a very big problem down the road because someone didn't say something sooner. In the world of law enforcement, it's a rank and file system, right? It's a paramilitary organization, and there's only so much that can be done, right? We sort of have that old theory that shit rolls downhill. Well, when it comes to the uphill stuff, usually what starts at the bottom will look very different when it ultimately gets to the top, if it even goes to the top. So the concept of, well, why can't you just say something? Well, we can, but there are certain rules that we have to follow. And if you don't follow those rules, yeah, you might make a difference, but it's not necessarily worth the gamble because there is a system in place, and that's how rank works, regardless of how we feel about it. But why the workplace relationship is so critical is that the employer in this scenario has to be sometimes the bigger person or the more patient one and listen to every single problem. Now, the employee, they should do their best to mitigate those problems and decide what is something worth discussing and what is something that you can figure out on your own. In a relationship or a marriage, I'm sure that there are a lot of things that we would like to talk about. However, as time goes on and the relationship grows, you're going to sort of pick and choose, right? And especially in a relationship that involves some level of chaos. Now, the example that I give is a marriage. However, for the comparison to law enforcement, I would say that it's a marriage with kids and a bunch of other factors that sort of have to be controlled and mitigated within that relationship, right? So as you go on and you grow, you're going to pick and choose your battles pretty quickly. And as you grow and you get to know each other, you're going to decide, or maybe even know already, what's worth talking about and what isn't, what's going to change, what is not. However, regardless of what the outcome was previously, if you're willing to, put in the effort and it's worth it to you, then maybe it is okay to try and revisit something that was an issue before. And now time has gone by and we can sort of decide, is it worth bringing it up again? And that's going to be based on the individual. But again, going back to climate, how we feel, and the reaction that we give, specifically knee jerk reactions, that's all going to be climate based for the most part. So when things are already bad, the employee is going to have more of an adverse reaction to something happening, right? They already have a very thin amount of patience left, and frustration is very palpable. So if there's one thing that doesn't go right, well, it's going to set them off versus the mentality of, hey, things are great. This little problem, nah, I'm not going to worry about that little problem because I got all this other great stuff happening around me. Case by case. But for the most part, I would say most agencies right now are pretty linear in terms of morale. I have the distinct pleasure of talking with a lot of guys and gals in law enforcement across the nation, and it is somewhat alarming to me, the consistencies that we share despite being so different and so many different walks of life culturally. I mean, you go from one part of this nation to the other by a couple hundred miles in a different direction, you're going to see different culture shifts. You're going to see different mentalities, different viewpoints, but the baseline similarities are pretty wild when you look at how similar things are when it comes to the general consensus of cop world right now, and how the majority of them are, they're not happy, they're not miserable, they're just okay. And there are a lot of people who are miserable. The amount of people who are happy, that's always been a small number, and that's okay, because we're never truly, truly, truly going to say, I love this job and I love my job. But, and that's a big but, there are a lot of things that I would change about it. And that's not a department issue. That's just cop world overall, right? And there's only so much that I can do in regards to, state legislature and all the things that a lot of us are facing in California, which is quickly becoming pretty common for other states across the nation right now. But it begs the question, can I do something right now to change my agency that would make it better for me and everyone else? And the answer is yes. It's always going to be yes. And what we have to think about, though, is when we look at the relationship between the employee and the employer. Now, I say employer. Employer is a big word because that includes a lot of people, mostly admin, who are in charge of essentially making decisions, right? That's just kind of how things happen. However, how things get moving and how policies change or mindset change, that can come from a collective of people and a variety of efforts across the agency. It doesn't have to be specific. And, a lot of good ideas do come from a very low level. They get attention and they make their way up the chain, which is awesome. Now, with the relationship stuff, when we have an employee who, thinks about things, they're not knee jerk, but they put it into, a concept or idea that is explainable, and also they can be articulate in what they're looking for or what the problem is that they're trying to fix, and they present it, and the powers that be ultimately have that knee jerk reaction, and they say, well, no, we're not doing that, and if you don't like it, you can leave. Basically, we'll break up, right? If there was a relationship, a marriage, or serious, relationship you're in, and you go to the other person and you say, look, I love this relationship. I love everything about us, but there are some things that I would like us to work on. And the other person says, well, no, we're just going to break up then. Fine. Fuck it. We'll get divorced. That is the absolute last thing that you would want to hear as the other person in that conversation, because it completely invalidates the strength or the commitment that you once had, and kind of it reduces it to something that can just be kicked to the curb, which would essentially hurt that person's feelings, create an emotional reaction, and so forth. Now, if your bosses had that same reaction when you voiced a concern, right? How would that make you feel? Well, the answer is probably bad, right? It would not make us feel good. What we would like to hear is the other person say, okay, well, what are your concerns? I like this relationship as well. I'm happy, and I want to be the best version of myself for you. So how can we change this? How can we work on this? And yeah, that's a very, you know, PC answer to that. But even if the answer was somewhat of, well, I don't necessarily agree with you, I don't really like that, but I like this relationship, so I'm willing to listen a little bit more. Now, when you hear people say I'm happy, but the but, no matter how big it is, can be a large or small problem. It can be a gripe. It can be something that may not be fixable in the stroke of a pen, right? So again, kind of trying to avoid a broad brush. There are certain things that can be fixed immediately, and there are certain things that may take a long time. Now, it's important for both sides, but especially the employee, to understand that it may not be something that will be a quick fix, and it may require some work. It may require multiple drafts, right? So if you get told no, don't be upset. Just ask why, and then take notes of the reasons why it was, and then try to fix it, right? If the answer is an absolute no, fine, but there needs to be some explanation. And that's where the key word comes in. And that key word is communication. Communication will make or break any relationship. And the key factor in communication is that both sides understand that it is going to be something that will benefit both parties down the road. Now, is communication always positive? Well, no, because sometimes we can argue, sometimes we can fight. But I always remind people that in any relationship, if it's worth arguing over, it's probably worth talking about. Now, when cooler heads prevail and we collect our thoughts, we can put something together that, ultimately creates a conversation. Now, any fight in any relationship is very important, because short of the topic being something completely ridiculous, right? Let's say, for example, that it's something like we just talked about. One side says, hey, I have some concerns here. This is what I'm dealing with. I want to work this out with you. And it turns into an argument. Well, then that means that both sides have some sort of passion or skin in the game enough to where they either want to, fight it, or they want to, dispute it, whatever the case may be. Now, how we fix that problem is with communication, either in the interim or the aftermath, right? Again, trying to avoid a knee-jerk reaction or argument, and listening. And that the listening portion does fall on the shoulders of the employer most of the time. I would encourage that both sides listen, but upon the initial approach and you have the employee, go to the employer, which is usually how it works, because very seldom do you have the employer going to the employee. It does happen, but for purposes of what we're talking about, they go to the employee and they say, the employer, and they say, hey, look, this is an issue. I'm not the only one who feels this way. I think this is a good idea, blah, blah, blah. And the employer, even if initially they think in their head, this is ridiculous, there's no way in hell this is going to happen, at least say, okay, well, this will be hard and challenging, but I'm willing to listen. So what is it that we're trying to do here? What are you asking for? Or what is the goal, right? What are you trying to accomplish? And how can I help in that regard? And the important thing is that communication is key, right? Talking about it. After the conversation is over, however, it's extremely important that regardless of the outcome, the employer does give something back. And it's okay if the answer is no. We can't do this right now, or I don't think this will ever happen, but here's why. And the employee can take that information and go, okay, cool. Thank you for at least hearing me, especially when they know that you looked into it and it's not just a flat out no. It's a, hey, here's why we can't do it. Even if the answer is very direct, I can't do this because I don't think it's the right thing to do. That's okay. That creates conversation, because the employee could say, okay, well, I respect your opinion. Out of curiosity, why don't you think this will work? And that creates dialogue. Conversation is so critical. And we are so quick to usually eliminate that because of rank structure. However, if you get creative and you have a, supervisor who's supportive of your endeavors. Again, surrounding yourself with people who want to see this grow. But understand that just because you have a good idea doesn't mean that it's a good idea. It just means that you think it's a good idea. So I would say pick your battles and choose your tactics based on, the majority, right? And if you think it's a good idea, by all means run with it. But it's going to get a better reaction when you have strength in numbers. And 9 times out of 10, if it's a policy change or it's something that everyone else is doing around you, then the likelihood of it getting the pressure from the majority is highly probable. And that could be a variety of things. But just know that if you do your research and you do it correctly, there will be a high probability of you seeing that proposal going up the chain and then actually getting reviewed. And ultimately, if it comes back with some notes or corrections or whatever it is, take those notes, use them, and then contact other people who have done this before. Again, there's so many resources that we have at our disposal that we tend to either ignore or just not take advantage of because we're scared or we don't want to ask for help. But if you've been listening to my show for any amount of time, you know that I'm a huge advocate for saying those famous words. I've never done this before. How do I do this? And for a lot of us who are, even semi-experienced, the likelihood of someone writing something like that or doing a proposal, it doesn't happen very often. So again, if you know someone within your agency who has done it or who's familiar, go for it. So the big thing though, communication, right? Again, two-way street. How do we fix it? And what are the advantages or the risk? And a lot of people freak out with the risk because nobody essentially wants to be that person who pushed something forward, especially if it ends up working out negatively. My advice to that would just be, if it's important enough for you to talk about it and to start writing things down, then it's important enough for you to share. Again, consult your coworkers, because you can't be this one mindset that thinks this is the best idea ever and the majority goes, no, that's not going to work. But again, knowing your audience, knowing your coworkers, if you feel like it is important, roll with it. Now, solutions that come from the administration can come in a variety of ways. Speaking personally, my admin just did a survey a couple months ago, and it was cool. I was happy that the survey was published, and there were a lot of people who responded. We're still waiting on the results, but if they're willing to ask, right, that does show that there's an initiative there, that the concept to, listening to new ideas or even change overall is on the table. It's the agencies that do nothing, say nothing, and there's no communication that will ultimately lose people. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. The concept of, oh, we're better off without you. Fine. If you're not happy here, leave. We don't get to say that anymore as law enforcement, because we need every good cop we can get, especially the ones who have, cut their teeth through the last 4 years, and they're still here trying to do the right thing for the right reasons, right? Those guys have to stay. And even the newer guys that we're seeing now, we're sort of leaving that bizarre hiring pool, and it's getting a little bit deeper, which is awesome, because now we have guys and gals again who are saying, cool, I want to be a cop. I want to go out there and kick ass and be a good employee and help my community. Those people are all coming back slowly. They're trickling in, and we do have to keep that momentum going. So if your agency is taking action to at least listen, right? They're not just throwing money at new employees. They're factoring in the guys who have been there for a while, because that's an argument that I've heard lately is we're doing all these hiring bonuses, right, for these new guys who haven't even worked a day in their life at this agency. And you have guys who have been there for, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And what's their incentive to stay? What are you doing to essentially keep them there, right? And we do need senior leadership in our agencies, because every single month and year we are building the new administration. And with every promotion that we get to a new supervisory level, that's a new candidate for lieutenants, captains, and so forth. So when you look at the people who promote, you are looking at your next administration. And for a lot of agencies, there's a lot of concern because either promotions aren't happening like they thought they would, or the people who they were hoping to promote are jumping ship and they're going to go do something else. And a lot of them are leaving their agencies because they are deciding to essentially leave a toxic relationship. And those are what we refer to as cycle breakers, where you have someone who is, essentially stuck in this rut. And I get it, man. It's really hard to leave and go start over in cop world. But eventually you go, you know what? Fuck it. I can't do this anymore. And they don't do it with a knee-jerk reaction. They take their time. They're very methodical. They do their research, and they find the agency who says, yeah, we can be better than her. And I say her, but him, you know the difference. But My point is that in any relationship, eventually if someone says, no, you're going to have it better over here, you're going to leave. And even if you have talked to that person again and again and again, that's even more ammo for you to say, no, I tried. I voiced my opinion. I tried really, really hard to work with you and to change things and to do this, that, and the other. But ultimately, I wasn't happy and you weren't making me happy. So I left. And that other agency will sit there scratching their head, but they'll find someone else. They'll find someone to replace you. They'll find someone else to fill those boots. But I assure you, it won't even be close to the caliber of the cop that you had before. So again, communication and focusing on what makes the majority happy and not the minority, because the minority generally for the most part are going to the people who are the least removed from the patrol mindset and essentially boots on the ground, right? The worker bees of the agency, which is the largest and the most important part of any law enforcement entity. But for some reason, more times than not, I feel like the discussions get brought up within these higher up meetings, the guys who are, no offense, the least connected to the street. And they're making decisions thinking that this is the best for the agency, when in reality, it's probably not. So I'm not saying that we have to put things to a vote, but if you do something like a survey or like, say, a poll or something where you get the information and it's there and the data is right there in front of you. And even if you don't agree with it, the important thing is that you're big enough to say, you know what, I don't necessarily like this, but 90% of my employees want it. So fine, I'll give in. And that doesn't mean that it makes you weak or not a leader. You're doing something that is best for the mission at hand, right? It's like that dad that doesn't want to get the dog and he's upset about the dog, but all the kids are like, please, 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 we'll do all this stuff. We'll take care of it, blah, blah, blah. And then you get the dog and everyone's happy. Sometimes we just have to do things that we may not necessarily agree with. We may not even like it, but the bottom line is it makes this place better and my employees will be here for another 10 to 15 years. And one of the things that I really want to, drive home for all the stuff we're talking about today is that it's going to essentially thrive when communication is on the table. But you have to understand is that nothing will ever be perfect. We can't keep chasing this imaginary place that we think will be better than where we are now. The majority of cops across the nation they're satisfied. They're okay with where they work. They're kind of upset about some things, but that comes in waves. If you are truly, truly in a toxic working relationship, you will know. If you actually hate where you work, you hate going to work, you hate your coworkers, you hate your boss, you hate everything about where you are, you should leave. I understand starting over sucks, and I totally get it. It is the worst possible option, but decide if your sanity is more important. And then plan your exit strategy. Don't just escape. Don't just run away. Think about it, do it right. You've been here this long. You can survive a few more months planning your escape. And eventually you have to make that decision. But for the most of us the majority of us, I should say, who are in a position where we are, for the most part, we're happy, but there are some gripes on the table, then start thinking about communication and understand that no matter what we do, we are going to have good months, good years, bad years. It all comes with a variety of factors that most of the time are out of our control. However, there are a lot of things on the table that we do have the ability to control, things that we can, use to create dialogue, to create conversation, and ultimately, again, creating communication. If you don't try, you will never hear the word no. And if you don't try, you will definitely never hear the word yes. Guys, thank you so much for being here today. Again, I just wanted to hop on and do a quick, episode on relationships, and that's one that I've been wanting to put out for a few weeks now. I just haven't really found the time, and I wanted to write it to make sure that it sounded good. I was busy over the weekend with Mother's Day stuff, so yeah, thanks. And to all the moms out there and all the dads doing both roles, happy Mother's Day. You guys have a great, safe week, and I will be back next week with a very special guest from Los Angeles. I'm excited to have her on. Don't miss it. And in the interim, like I said, man, advocacy and any effort that will be a champion of change will come from communication. So I know that's kind of a word salad, but at the end of the day, get creative, change if you can, and if you can't, figure it out, go somewhere else. And I get it. There's a lot to unpack with everything that we've talked about today, and all of the different variables and different rabbit holes we can go down. But for the purposes of you and you alone, and what you want to change, if anything, just understand that if we say nothing, nothing will change. That's just sort of the bottom line. But yeah, guys, again, thank you so much. This will be it today. I'm going to leave it here. It's an episode that I've been writing for probably a month, but just haven't gotten around to doing it. And again, I just wanted to do it when I felt like the timing was there, and here it is. So I will be back next week with a very special guest from Los Angeles. She's a doctor, time and technology permitting. We get to throw that episode out there for you guys to listen to. If you are a mom or a dad who plays both roles, happy belated Mother's Day. Family is everything. And again, guys, be safe. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.